One night, I went to pick up a woman who ran away from her husband after he beat her. She had fled on foot, leaving behind her 3 babies. When I came upon her location, I saw merely a speck of her at a payphone, at the shell of a big box store across a huge, empty parking lot. A modern-day picture of the utter desolation of the dark night of a soul. I thought, what do I do now? These dark nights often come to a deadlier end. Recently, a man allegedly stabbed his ex-partner to death by slitting her throat and staying in the bedroom with her body for 10 hours. Imagine the fear and suffering this young woman endured, probably knowing she was about to die. A police officer once said to me, if people only saw the cruelty of a domestic murder like we do, we would still ask, what do we do about it? More than 10 million victims are abused by their intimate partners each year. More than half the women who are killed are murdered by their partners. 3 dying every day. So why do we tolerate such savagery? Because we are not sufficiently outraged to act effectively. Because domestic violence doesn't usually enter our consciousness until it enters our lives. And when it does, it devastates all involved. Because no one knows what to do. A father is scared. He fears his daughter's in danger from her abusive husband. His worst fear comes true, and he laments, I knew he would kill her. I didn't know what to do. Domestic violence is so deeply pervasive, reaching into every class of every community. Some of us here have suffered domestic violence because of a loved one's struggle. Some of us here are victims, some survivors. 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men will experience severe, intimate partner violence in their lives. This is the world to which victims awoke this morning or died in. It's also our world. What will we choose to do about it? I come to you as a former Washington, D.C. police officer who's worked in neighboring Maryland in a second career with domestic violence, who's experienced its ravages on a personal level. At every level, the same question, what can I do? Today, I'll offer an answer. A note to start. I'll sometimes refer to the victim as a woman, to emphasize the crux of the problem as an issue of violence against women. Some men are abused as well. Have you ever seen a woman walking down the street late at night with a stroller, kids straggling behind? Did you shake your head at the sadness of that sight, or even judge? What's she doing out at this hour with those kids? How did you respond? Like many of us, it's none of my business. Or with the thought she might be abused, even harder yet, they can choose to leave. This is what makes domestic abuse so difficult to process, the illusion that victims have choices. What are the destructive forces that cause the victim's dilemma? Intimate partner violence is perpetrated by a lone abuser who's the current or ex-partner of their target, the one they're said to love. Victims are under the abuser's power and control, coerced and manipulated at every step. Abuse is very often physically violent, but always emotional. 28% of murdered victims had never experienced physical violence in the relationship. It's learned behavior through experiences growing up, creating both abusers and victims, carried on from one generation to the next. Abusers aren't born violent. It's a pattern of abuse, not an isolated incident. Abusers are not one-hit wonders. They have a history of abuse for which they are often not held accountable, giving them license to continue unfettered. Many victims would choose to leave, but feel they can't because of uncontrollable circumstances. Having the ability to pack up and leave is privileged. Many victims have nothing, not money for food, for bus fare, for hotel, for diapers. Victims are often paralyzed by the fear their partners will become more violent or kill them if they try to leave. And their sense is correct. 75% of murdered victims were leaving or had left their partner. Fear, devastation. Listen to the shambles of a child's voice, now an orphan, as she tells the 911 operator that her daddy just killed her mommy and they're both dead. You will never be able to unhear that. And once violence starts, it often becomes more frequent and more severe. Can you imagine how a woman can sleep, can cope? How the kids can look forward to their day at school when they know their mother is being brutalized and their own beatings may await them. The specter of violence always lurking. Victims always looking over their shoulder. Can you imagine a darker world? But this is the world in which many members of this community are living or dying as each day passes. What can we do? If we know someone in our community is in danger, and we have the benefit of learning who they are and doing something about it, whose job is it to try to save their life? The struggle toward the restoration of hope involves one more ingredient: responsibility in its fullest form, the will and the willingness of the community to step in, and the faithfulness and resolve to do it well. A recent study cites that 10% of domestic homicide victims had experienced some form of violence in the month preceding their death, noting potential missed opportunities for intervention. I'm here to talk to you about becoming proactive in intervention and prevention, specifically through a practice used in 36 states called the Lethality Assessment Program, the LAP. The LAP came about in 2003 because the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence, a nonprofit organization, wanted to address the problem of intimate partner homicides and to provide first responders and advocates the tools to do that. Using the best research, we wanted to create a user-friendly instrument for field practitioners that would identify high-danger victims, those in the greatest danger of being killed by their partner, and get them help. A team of researchers and practitioners with a commitment to getting it right worked for 2 years to create a new model in the way practitioners such as law enforcement and domestic violence advocates would do business. Getting it right also meant we had to create a proactive way to connect high-danger victims immediately to the protective and empowering services of a domestic violence program. The stark reality is that only 4% of victims who'd been killed had reached out to a hotline or shelter in the year prior to their death. We had to change that dynamic. The best way, in our judgment, a phone call from the scene. We field tested. Officers told us the lap process was easy enough to do. We implemented in 2005. Here's how it works. On the scene, an officer uses criteria to decide if a lethality screen should be administered. Did an assault occur? Have officers been to the home before? Did something just not seem right? The screen is comprised of 11 yes or no questions. These are evidence-based, mostly nonviolent behaviors and factors that identify high-danger victims. Once a victim is assessed as being in high danger, the officer gives them first the bad news, then the good news. It sounds like this. Miss Saunier, according to your answers, you're in danger. People in your situation have been killed. What I'd like to do now is call the local domestic violence hotline to get some information to give to you. And while I'm on the phone, I'd like you to think about speaking with them. What do you think? No, you don't want to? It's okay, you don't have to. But as I said, I'm going to call them to get some information for you. And while I'm on the phone, just think about maybe speaking with them. The officer makes the call. If the victim agrees with the officer on the scene, the advocate and the victim have a brief private conversation in which the advocate actively encourages the victim to go into the program's services. This dialogue you just heard is about encouraging trust, promoting a partnership among the officer, advocate, and victim, and offering the victim hope and empowerment. Even with successes, we strive to make the lap even better by putting it in the hands of anyone who comes in contact with a victim of domestic violence. The vision of the lap is 3 interconnected circles of participation. The first circle is law enforcement, the primary first responders. The second circle are the healthcare system, social services, private practices and organizations, the faith community. These are professionals in whom victims trust and confide, who connect them to domestic violence services. The third circle, not yet closed, with the greatest power to help prevent domestic homicide, is the public, particularly those personally involved in a victim's life, family, friends. I hearken back to that father's lament. If we don't close that third circle, the lap is not complete. And that father's lament will become our bane. It takes all three circles of community participation to have as full an effect on prevention as we humanly and systematically can. So what can we choose to do about it? It's likely so few high-danger victims go into services because they don't realize the trouble they're in, or that services even exist. I call upon you, law enforcement, healthcare, allied professionals, the faith community, to close that third circle so the community can join you in a proactive community commitment to faithfully and fully accept the responsibility of getting victims into services and saving lives. And if you will, let's take the first step now. Faith House of Acadiana is the local domestic violence program. Please, take out your phones. You can take out your phones. And save this number. Their local 24-hour hotline for when you need it. Some of you may not be from this area, so I encourage you to look up your local domestic violence program and save their number. Agencies, organizations. If you don't know Faith House already, make a call. Introduce yourselves. Make the connection. Mothers, fathers, family, friends, concerned, community members. If a loved one is being abused, call Faith House. Don't wait. Become the first community to realize the full vision of the LAP as an empowering force to restore hope and choice to victims in your midst. You can choose to do that. Thank you.